Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight's parent support webinar. We are really excited about tonight's topic. What is blended learning? And we are joined with Betsy Hicks. You are in for a real treat. She's going to present this session to you. I'll be monitoring the chat. If there's anything you need, just let me know. Take it away, Betsy.
Well, thank you, Amber. Welcome to tonight's Rethink Education Family Support webinar. We host these webinar sessions to help families better support their children's learning when at home. And tonight's topic is, what is blended learning? My name is Betsy Hicks, and I am the Northeast Regional Virtual Instruction Services Consultant. So before we really get started this evening, I'd like to go over what our learning objectives are. Throughout our time together tonight, we will first identify and really define the concept of blended learning in a public school classroom. Next, we will summarize what the four main models of blended learning are, and then we're going to describe how blended learning might be applied in a typical day of learning in a North Carolina classroom. And then lastly, we would like to kind of demonstrate how blended learning can have a positive impact on every single child's growth and success in a 21st century classroom. So let's take a look at our session agenda. I'm so excited to be able to present this session tonight, just focusing on the ways that we can support caregivers as we introduce the concepts of blended learning. Our session will flow like this. First, we will take time to go over a few webinar basics and meeting etiquette. We will then dive into the content of our webinar, What is Blended Learning? During our time together, we'll also chat about the different ways that blended learning can look in a classroom, and what the benefits of a strong blended learning instruction or curriculum can look like, and how those can meet the individual needs of all students. Time will be provided for you at the end of our webinar should you have any questions. Because we are meeting virtually, I'd like to go over some meeting norms with you. So the first one is, it's been a long day, but let's all be present and actively engaged in the activities and discussions. I'd love to hear some feedback from you. Please be respectful of others. We all come to this time together with a different perspective, and so please approach those with respect, and I'm sure that you will. Please place any questions that you might have in the chat box. Amber is helping me keep an eye on those, and we will answer those either through the chat, or I will answer them verbally if they don't get answered in the chat. And then please remain muted during the presentation. And then I promise, cross my heart, we will start on time and we will end on time. Tonight, we are using the Zoom platform for our session, and I want to make sure that you can locate the chat area, since this is really how you will participate and engage in tonight's session. So please look for the chat icon or the chat box. Throughout tonight's presentation, when you see the chat symbol, we will be using the Zoom chat to engage with one another. Notice anytime that you want to type in something for everyone else to see, use the word everyone, and it will be in the to field. If you want to only send your questions to a specific person or to me, please click on everyone and then choose that name from the drop-down box of choices. When we are discussing things as a group, it's usually best to send a question or a comment or statement to everyone so that everyone can be looped in on that discussion thread. And lastly, I'd like to make sure that everybody knows where the chat even is. So please enter your first name into the chat for everyone, and let's see who is here. Let's do some introductions. This is also a great way to make sure we understand our tech tools. Well, good evening, Amber. Hi, Vicki. Hi, Tarisha. Thank y'all for joining. Hello, Iris. Hello, Deepak. Deepak coming in strong with a smiley face. Amber too, I love it. Okay. Thank you um, for for playing nice, for using that chat bar. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. What is blended learning anyway? I'd like for you to take a minute and just read this quote. Going blended is about more than just technology. It's about rethinking instruction and effectively managing innovation over time. This is a quote that provides the foundation and the overall purpose of our Rethink Education program. So, our purpose involves going beyond just technology and really, truly rethinking our approach to meeting the needs of all students. It involves a level of teacher preparedness that lends itself to a more innovative and inclusive method of instruction within any type of disruptive situation. And we're going to talk about what some of those situations could look like and how your child could easily adapt into that blended learning format. So blended learning, just a quick definition. Blended learning is a formal education program in which a student learns. And so when a student is learning in a blended learning environment, at least part of the online learning is going to be held online. The student is going to have some elements of control. They might control their time, they might control their place where they're taking their instruction. They might control their path and or, as I mentioned, their pace of learning. So a lot of flexibility is provided within that blended learning framework. At least part of a blended learning curriculum is supervised in a brick and mortar location, and some of that can be online, as we mentioned a minute ago. The modalities along each of the students' learning path within a course or subject are connected to provide an integrated learning experience. So we're going to talk about what that looks like, how it accommodates student flexibility, efficiency, how it can be personalized for every single student, how different learning styles can be accommodated, and how it really frees up the teacher to truly personalize learning for every single child in the classroom. As we talk about blended learning, I want to introduce you to the four main models of blended learning. When people think about blended learning, sometimes they just think of hybrid learning, and it is so much more than that. The four main models that we are going to talk about tonight are the station rotation model, the flex model, the blend model, and the lab model. And if you notice on this graphic, from left to right, it's a continuum. So in the left, starting with rotation, primarily we're going to see most children, most students and pupils involved in face-to-face instruction. Whereas when we get to full lab instruction, that's going to be the most extreme, where primarily most of the instruction is typically done online. And so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that now. What does blended learning look like in a classroom? If you were to pop into a public school classroom in North Carolina, what would that look like? What would you expect for your child to be doing if they were participating in a blended lesson? Let's find out. The first model that I'd like to introduce you to is the rotation model. Excuse me. So the rotation model is one that might be familiar to you if you've ever heard your child or your student talk about classroom centers. So when we think about centers, sometimes we think about students in elementary school and primary grades. However, student rotations and student centers can be extremely effective in upper grades, including middle school and high school too. And there are a couple of reasons why. In this graphic, you see that there are several different types of rotations. So for example, what is rotation model anyway? Let's start there. So the rotation model is a course or a subject in which students can rotate on a fixed schedule at the teacher's discretion between learning modalities, and at least one of these is online learning. Other modalities might include activities like small groups. It might include a whole group instruction, like a mini lesson on the carpet or a mini lesson at desks. It might include group projects. It might include individual tutoring. It might include pencil and paper assignments. Students in this model are going to mostly learn in their brick and mortar campus location. So that's that face-to-face traditional setting that we're usually used to seeing. So when we talk about station rotation, this is going to allow students to move through stations on a fixed schedule set by the teacher. So think about moving clockwise or counterclockwise through these different stations that have been set up by the teacher. Generally, one of these stations might be students doing work online, and that work online is in alignment with the lesson that can be differentiated or personalized to the student's individual level or need. So even though they're getting grade level exposure, they are getting targeted instruction in exactly what they need. And because it's on a device, sometimes on a device, their peers don't know that they are getting that targeted instruction. Everybody's getting exactly what they need. When we talk about lab rotation, it's the image in purple to the right. Usually when one hears the word lab, the first thing that comes to mind is what? Maybe processes or science. So when we think about lab, we think about whole group. So that's what I like for you to remember. Lab, whole group. The idea of processes and whole group can be transferred to this type of rotation. And so in today's climate, so many of our schools are one-to-one schools, meaning the ratio, one child, for every one child, each child has a device. And if a school is not a one-to-one school, a lot of schools have carts, class carts that have devices, or carts that they share in between classes. So not that all labs are antiquated, but they're just not as prevalent as maybe they once were. A lot of the spaces that were once designated as computer labs are now being utilized for other purposes like maker spaces. Some schools do still have a computer lab full of desktop computers or a class set of laptop computers that stay in one room, maybe in the media center. In a lab rotation, a student classroom might rotate through in online activities or possibly even offline activities using a fixed schedule. And this schedule is determined by the teacher. So for example, if your child is, excuse me, in the 5th grade, and they are doing a project, some kind of research project. Perhaps the classroom teacher would reserve that computer lab and everybody would go into the library or the computer lab and work on researching and then maybe keyboarding to work on this project together. And so that is one way that you might see your child working in a lab rotation model in today's classroom. What's a flipped model? This instruction flips the traditional way of teaching, so particularly the relationship between classroom work and homework. This model allows for teachers to use the face-to-face classroom time for teacher-guided practice or projects. And this model has seen really great success with older students who can handle that responsibility of completing work independently at home and come back ready for next level conversation. And when I say next level conversation, I mean the next day in class might be those really deep Socratic seminars, or even maybe a deeper dive into the rigor and the different layers of the standard course of study. Because a portion of the lesson is recorded in that flipped format, this offers a really unique opportunity for your child to play back what they may have missed the first time. Think about all of the things that we have right now that are on demand. I can think about the things that I have said that I need instantly just today. So-and-so, what's the weather? Play this song. If my child is in the den right now and she punched up the Grinch, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and that was on demand right at her fingertips, that is exactly like the flip model. If a student misses something, they've got easy access to it. They can go back and watch it as many times as they need to, rewind the teacher, and help really solidify any missed content, or hear it multiple times to help solidify any muddy gaps. And these two things, the ability to dive deeper the next day and the ability to cycle back and hear those directions multiple times, make the flip very attractive for students, but also for teachers too. And then lastly, within this rotation model, is the individual rotation. And this allows for students to rotate through those stations on individual schedules that are determined by the classroom teacher, or perhaps even a software algorithm. You might have a child that's come home from school and mentioned a form of software that their school district is using with Fidelity. And that program might offer opportunities that help track your student's path, and that also scaffold any missing content knowledge that they might have and offer some interventions. And if they are on the opposite end of that spectrum, if they have already mastered what has to be met, the program can accelerate the child when that mastery is met early on in the program. So those individual rotations can be very attractive for personalizing the needs of students as well. When we talk about the rotation model, you might hear your student come home and talk about a playlist. If you listen to avenues, music vendors like Pandora or Spotify or any others, you might have a music playlist of your own. Maybe you use a Napster way back, or you made a mixtape from the radio. You might have handwritten a playlist. A playlist is a self-paced set of activities that are part of the blended learning model, and those offer choice for the student. The student is able to choose which activities they would like to complete based on the order. Even though all activities have to be completed, they get to choose the order that they are completed in. It allows the student to have more voice. Who doesn't like to feel heard? A playlist is a great avenue for that. And it also allows the student to control more of their own path and more of their own pacing. Have any of your children come home from school and talked about possibly a playlist that they have been exposed to in their classroom? Oh, good. I love seeing that. It is always fun to have voice and choice when we are learning. It definitely increases engagement. And when engagement is increased, behavior, bad behavior is decreased, which is also attractive as a parent. Let's see, I wanted to provide you with an example of a lesson template of what a station rotation might look like. So as you can see, there is a teacher-led station, there's an online station, and these stations provide opportunities for things like creativity, opportunities for critical thinking skills, opportunity for effective communication to be developed, and even opportunities to collaborate with peers. These are not just skills that are aligned with the curriculum, but they're 21st century skills that our students have to be successful long after they are out of our classrooms. So if you're curious about what a block of time might look like in the station rotation block, this is pretty much it. And these are some common activities that your child might do when learning in stations. And I want to make sure, I want to note that none of these stations require a student to be on a device the entire time. When we talk about blended learning in the classroom, we are not talking about putting a screen in front of a child for the entire time they are at school. That is simply not it. The screen can help accelerate or enhance the needs of the student, but it certainly is not the vehicle for all day instruction. As you can see, also these skills, the way that this is set up also provides opportunity for personalization for your child's learning style, but even their ability level as well. Are there any questions about rotation before we hop into the flex model? Oh, absolutely. Freedom definitely helps incite more interest. Okay, well, let's hop into the flex model. So the flex model can be an extremely disruptive model of blended learning, meaning that this is going to replace that traditional paradigm of school culture and structure where students are going to be driving the instruction and teachers are becoming more of the facilitator in this process. So, I mean, how does that even look? Well, one characteristic of this model is having access to a large open space. So I want you to kind of think about what you would have envisioned your child's traditional classroom looking like and erase it from your mind, because that is not how the flex model is set up. A large open space is critical for the flex model for several reasons. When we talk about the flex model, it has to be large and open because it needs to be designed to accommodate various instructional groups that can meet to help small group facilitation, maybe some independent study, as well as a common area for student interaction. And so this is a form of blended learning instruction that can be monitored by a paraprofessional or several paraprofessionals so that the teachers can get in and really, really hone in on those smaller instructional groups and personalize the learning for each student. Now, not all flex models have to look like the one that I just explained. And not all flex models are done for the full semester. Some flex models can be a flex day. Some might like a flex Friday. You might hear your children talk about that. I know there are several schools here in the Northeast that have a flex Friday. Primarily at the high school level, but there are others. It might be a flex block. It might be a flex week. So there are several ways to get creative with the flex model. Benefits of this model might include things like individualized pacing, time for student intervention or extension. So if your student is behind or if they're really, really ahead, they're not getting bored or frustrated. So they're not losing interest. They're still staying motivated, which is a huge piece of success. Individualized student assessments, individualized instruction, individualized learning goals, as well as opportunities for online but offline learning as well. So realistically, now this model presents some challenges too. They can be overcome, but it's got to be considered before it's fully implemented at one school. For example, the master schedule, because there does need to be this big flexible space, a master schedule has to be considered. So that peers can, regularly interact when it's appropriate for them to do so. But this is a very, very creative way to personalize instruction for individual students. So if you were to see the flex model in action in a school building, these are some things that you might observe. Students would be moving on an individually customized fluid schedule among the different learning modalities. So perhaps you have a student that is a visual learner. Their schedule would accommodate that learning modality. Perhaps you have a student who learns primarily by who is an auditory learner or a tactile learner or is a kinesthetic learner. They learn best by doing. The different learning modalities are highlighted in the flex model, which is attractive. The teacher of record or other adults are on site and they provide face-to-face support on a daily or weekly or even an as-needed basis. So they are there, they are ready, they are coaching, they are facilitating, but the student is really driving the instruction. Content and instruction are going to be delivered primarily online, but both on-site and remotely. And this can be done even with learning kits. And so when I say learning kits, I mean packets, but not just packets of paper. They can be, if you're an art teacher, it could be your child could be working with Play-Doh. Your child could be working with cubes in math. Your child could be working with all kinds of various manipulatives that would really enhance that learning experience, more so than just a pack of 50 papers that have been collated and stapled together, to make learning more hands-on. And also in this type of model, you would expect to see content and instruction that are flexible and adaptive. You would expect to see so many small groups that are targeting exactly what groups need that are on the same skill level. You would expect to see group projects, and then you would expect to see some individual tutoring, because students are able to be on devices at different points in the day because they have these personalized schedules. This allows time in the day for the teacher or the paraprofessional to hone in and provide that targeted support when needed. Okay, we're moving right along. What is the blend model? Well, the blend model is one that sometimes educators refer to as maybe the hybrid model. Perhaps you remember that from when we had that hiatus or that time during COVID where we were not able to learn inside of our buildings. A lot of folks call that hybrid learning. So usually in this model, the teacher is located in a building on campus and the student is either off campus or is located in another brick and mortar building. And the teacher is teaching both students online and face-to-face simultaneously. Now, in some cases, these blend model classes include asynchronous learning elements like learning exercises and pre-recorded video instruction to support face-to-face classroom sessions. When planned really well, these courses combine the very best aspects of in-person and online learning while making education more attainable for many students. The blend model can look different in each school. One way that the blend model could possibly be implemented is for core subjects to be taken in person or face-to-face, and then the opportunity for electives to be taken online. The blend model provides an opportunity for districts and schools to fit in those traditional 180 calendar days of instruction and student needs, but when, the student needs are untraditional. And there are ways to meet the individual needs of students in this way. So for example, when I say an untraditional need, perhaps you have a student who is hospital or homebound. Maybe the student has had to have surgery and cannot come to school for an extended period of time. Enter the blend model. Your student could still live stream into the classroom and participate more so than just a Zoom. There are learning opportunities involved more so than just a video chat. I hope this would not be the case for your student, but maybe you know someone that it would impact. Long-term suspension. The blend model could definitely help improve the learning conditions for that student so that they don't fall behind. Learning could still take place, and socially they could still maintain those relationships with peers. There are several different ways that that blend model could accommodate the various needs of students that are untraditional. Does anybody have any questions about that blend model? Okay, let's move into the lab model. So if this model sounds reminiscent, then you are paying attention. When we discuss station rotation, we introduced the possibility of your child rotating through a computer lab with the entire class for certain projects or class times. This model is similar to that because it refers to the entire class. The way instruction is delivered, however, is much different. So On that continuum that we showed at the very beginning of our time together, the continuum of blended learning, the lab model is the model that we see where all students are, primarily all students, are in that virtual or online environment outside of the traditional brick and mortar school building. And our basic definition of the lab model is that students are going to take all courses online and or via preloaded devices and learning kits. So enter in those manipulatives again to help enhance and bolster the content that's being delivered. And those are going to be supplemented with in-person instruction as conditions allow. So as you can imagine, if you are a parent of a kindergarten through 8th grade student, this model is going to require quite a bit of parental support as we need to have that steady, clear, and consistent communication between all stakeholders. So because most of this instruction is done away from the brick and mortar building, it is critical for parents, especially parents of primary age students, primary meaning kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. I'll even throw 3rd grade in there to make sure that they are there and staying on top of communication with the educator and helping to make sure that the learning management system is understood and well managed at home. Because it is hard for a child that young to be able to be successful without parental support. Not impossible, but tricky. So why would anybody consider the lab model? I want you to take a look at this quote. Now, I've got a statistic to share with you. The number of districts with virtual instruction went up almost 40% from pre-COVID times to fall 2020. That is a lot. And so why would people consider this if it involves so much support at home? I'll tell you, it's flexible in time. The learner controls their own personal schedule and can balance their lives around learning. That's huge. If you've got a high school student, the high school student may have to have a job outside of the home. Enter the lab model. This is a great opportunity for that student. It's flexible in location. The learner might choose their location. The location could be as simple as sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor to stretching out on one's tummy instead of sitting, at a traditional desk. It could be learning in a bedroom or in a kitchen. It could be working at a community center, at the Boys and Girls Club, at a church, at a park, at a library. If he or she wants to meet virtually or face-to-face, sometimes face-to-face is available based on what the circumstances are for the child and for the brick and mortar location. The lab model is also flexible in pacing. So what does that mean? We keep saying pacing, pacing, pacing. The learner has the ability to pace themselves. So that means they have the option to spend more time on what they really need to learn and less time on what they've already mastered. Wow. That's when we talk about sort of mastery pathways. And that provides flexible learning pathways too. The learner might have the opportunity to drive their own learning based on their knowledge, their interest, and their learning styles. So when we have students that are very advanced, that are spending time just sort of losing interest because everybody's catching up to what they already know, they lose interest, they get bored, perhaps it becomes a disruption, or perhaps they just become unmotivated. And school doesn't become fun anymore. It doesn't become a place where they want to be. So enter in the lab model, enter in flexible pacing, enter in mastery pathways and learning pathways. And that might be a great way to hook your student again. It's not the end all be all, but it sure is mighty fine. How can blended learning support all students? Blended learning can impact and benefit all learners. So with any form of instruction, whether it's a blended learning model or a traditional learning model, meeting the needs of our vulnerable populations is imperative. So some of the way these benefits can help your student be more successful, whether they fall into this category of a special population or not, are opportunities like smaller class size. And by class size, I mean those individual small groups that allow opportunities for more intensive intervention or intensive extension to help your student be pushed to that next level or be brought up to grade level. It allows for flexibility in that pacing, how much time they're spending on different assignments. Now, that's not to say that they're just, lollygagging or zooming through. That pacing is still very much monitored by the teacher and the facilitator, but it does still allow a great deal of flexibility in pacing and choice in assignments for how assignments can be completed and submitted. Also, the ability to reach and serve students who otherwise might have an interruption in their education. So, for example, like we mentioned earlier, if a student is hospitalized or they are suspended from school for a long time, opportunities for credit recovery. This is huge for our high school students. Support through certain models like the flex model that would lend themselves towards experts that might be able to come to the school to talk about different careers or opportunities for clubs and community service. How great to offer that community collaboration. Flexibility in grading and mastery pathways. This could increase that intrinsic motivation for some and thus increase student engagement, which could ultimately impact graduation rates. So as you can see, blended learning, regardless of what model we are in, can really have a positive impact on all student groups. I wanted to share this chart with you. It shows the vertical and horizontal flow of what is typically required in a school year. Now, through blended learning, instructional strategies like rotating through horizontally planned stations and rigorous playlists and content-specific choice boards, students are able to maximize their time in the classroom with more personalized support from their teachers. I want you to remember, in a blended environment, the student doesn't necessarily have to be on a device all day. We've said that earlier. Most models lend themselves to multiple opportunities for offline learning while still receiving direct and individualized differentiated support and coaching from the teacher, as well as opportunities to collaborate with one's peers. When your child is participating in a high quality, intentional, and well-planned blended learning environment, your child is receiving personalized instruction on every level, from the school to the district to the state. And you can see that in this chart. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So what I want to leave you with is that every single child, and this is something that we believe at our deepest core here at Rethink, is that every single child is capable of learning. Is blended learning the right fit for your student? I don't know. I hope that it will be. Are there any questions that you have? Oh, thank you, Tricia. All right, folks. Well, we really appreciate you attending tonight's caregiver webinar. We'd like to know how helpful this session was for you. So if you wouldn't mind, please complete this short feedback form for us so that we can ensure we are creating helpful content for parents and caregivers. Let's see, we're going to put this link here in the chat. We'll also send a follow-up email with links to this presentation as well as a feedback form using the email that you provided to register for this webinar. We'll stay on the call until 7:45 in case you have any specific questions. Thank you so much for attending tonight's Rethink Education Caregiver webinar. We hope this has been helpful for you. We hope to see you at our next webinar for the Spanish-speaking families on this topic in January, on January 24th, to learn more about blended learning. Good night.